At the School for Moral Ambition, this organization I co-founded, we asked a bunch of researchers to say what the cause areas should be that we got to work on. We said, we're looking for the most sizable, the most solvable, and the most sorely neglected issues, where a small group, a SWAT team of very driven entrepreneurial people can make a massive difference. So they did 1,000 hours of research, spoke to a lot of experts, and came back to us and said, look, in Europe, if you want to do policy entrepreneurship in Brussels, then probably fighting big tobacco is one of the best returns on investment. That's where you can make the biggest possible impact, which was a big surprise for me. I thought, that we had already basically won that fight, that smoking was already declining. Turns out not to be the case. It's the single largest preventable cause of disease. If you care just about people dying, it's like orders of magnitude bigger than something like climate change, for example. So natural disasters is 60,000 deaths every year. Smoking is 8 million deaths every year. It's quite astonishing. And they've created the deadliest product in the history of civilization. Very smart people, by the way, have been working very long and hard to make it as addictive as possible. Now, what we discovered here is that indeed there was a total lack of awareness. So we've been recruiting marketeers and people who understand how to tell a good story to raise the saliency of this. But when I look at some other cause areas, take tax fairness and tax justice, for example, my analysis is different. I think that we've already won the fight for awareness. Yeah. The vast majority of people already agree. Polling around the globe shows this. 70 to 80% of people in the US, in the UK, in Europe, they want higher taxes on the rich. So I think that people like Gary do a great job and provide a great public service when they keep banging the drum and they force other journalists to also talk more about it. That is definitely helpful. But we also got to think hard about what is the next step here, right? How do we move from awareness to action? How do we actually build the right coalitions? How do we get the right room, the right people in the right room at the right time? Is it the OECD, the think tank in Paris? Do we need a couple of radical nerds there? Is it the IMF? Do we need to place people there? But then you need to have a very deep understanding of the system. This is one of those things that I liked about Ralph Nader. He would always emphasize that as soon as you start dozing off, and you think, oh, this is getting too complicated or bureaucratic or boring, that's where the money is, right? That's where the rich make the money. And so that's when we got to pay attention. And sure, it's exciting. It's more interesting to go to Davos and shout taxes, taxes, taxes. But that's the easy bit.
See, everything you're saying, it sounds to me like a kind of Leninism. Right, and I know you would never use that language, and I don't think necessarily even thinking in those terms.
Yeah.
But you're saying
I see what you're getting at.
We effectively, and it doesn't have to be democratic centralism. You effectively want to build a party of highly competent, talented, effective people to shift various debates in civil society, but also beyond the debates, actually catalyze action in different industries and different fields. And I think 100 years ago, somebody like Lenin would have said, "Yes, Rutger. That's building the party." Yeah. So I wonder, what's the relationship like between the stuff you're talking about, which I think most people would agree with and find it very exciting. What's the relationship between that stuff and actually the sort of the perennial questions of politics, like seizing state power, political power, building the party, etc.? Is there a relationship there? Is it something you think, actually, I would quite like social democratic left-wing party in the Netherlands to have all these really clever people pile into it, but also still doing their jobs beyond politics? Or is that looking at things in a very limited way?
So let me first emphasize that anyone can be morally ambitious. This is not just for Oxbridge graduates or something like that. I do spend a lot of time in my book punching up at those people who shouldn't just check their privilege, but also use it to make a big difference. But look, we all know that, Rosa Parks was a seamstress and Lech Walesa was an electrician. But those people don't need some lecture from me, to make a bigger possible impact. About politics, about the importance of actually seizing power.
Having power.
Having power. Yeah. I think it's a moral imperative. Politics is for power. Politics is not for purity. There is this figure that I like to describe as the noble loser, right? The people who say, oh, you know what? I stood on the right side of history. I shouted "Free Palestine" every single day. I posted it. I said solidarity with trans people, blah, 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 blah. I have all the right opinions. But did you make an actual difference, right? Well, and then if not, like, how were you helpful? The 100 billion animals who are currently being tortured in factory farms, they don't care about the fact that you've avoided this tiny little bit of milk powder in your, I don't know, whatever product you're consuming.
You say this as a vegan, by the way.
Yeah,
vegan, vegetarian. Yeah, just to be clear.
They care about you actually winning. They care about you passing legislation through parliament. That is what politics is for. This is a great book with the literal title, Politics is for Power. And a lot of us have turned into political hobbyists, right? We can win the debate in the group chat. We can bully people in the comment section. But can we actually make a difference as well? And wouldn't that be nice?
This is on the book, but it's not from the book. It's a recent interview you did here in the UK. You say you're angry at friends and contemporaries for their lack of moral ambition. And this is the quote. In this book, I am talking to my own people, as you've said here already, because I'm frankly a bit angry at them. Many of us went to great universities, maybe went to Oxford or Cambridge. We were going to take on global hunger. We were going to build affordable housing. We were going to accelerate the clean energy transition. And look at us. What are we doing? Now, you've talked about some of that already. Have you had personal conversations in your own private life with friends or family members where you've said this? Because obviously you're talking in the abstract to your readership.
Sure.
But actually having a private conversation with somebody talking like that would be quite hard for most people, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever done that?
A lot, yeah, all the time. Just today, I was doing vox pops in the city, asking bankers why they don't work on more important issues. I think it's important to make this personal.
To challenge people.
Yes. I've never found that problematic. Look, I think that moral ambition should be like 80% enthusiasm and 20% guilt and shame. But it's fine to push people a little bit, because indeed, read those application essays of people who enter Harvard or enter Oxford. It's all about how they're going to tackle tax avoidance and evasion, how they're going to solve global hunger, how they're going to prevent the pandemic. And it's just really sad what happens to most of these people. McKinsey knocks on their door, the golden handcuffs arrive, and we never hear from them again. A friend of mine calls it the Bermuda Triangle of talent: consultancy, corporate law, and finance. This dark chasm that sucks up so many of our best and brightest. And look, what I've discovered is that if you really want to get on these people's nerves, you should never say something like a traditional leftist would say, like, oh, you're so evil, you're so greedy, you're so bad, you're so selfish. Doesn't work. Then they're like, you're just jealous. You can't keep up. Poor you. No, what you should say instead is like, oh, wow, you're so talented and driven, and this is what you do? Okay, well, it's a free country. Anyone can live an utterly boring life. Bye. I'm going to talk to someone else now. And that hurts, right? That is much more effective in my experience.
You quote a writer who says being on the right side of history doesn't insulate one from weak analyses.
Yeah, that's Zainab Tufekci.
Yeah. What do you mean by that?
So she wrote about the Iraq war protests, the biggest protests in the history of the world, I think still, even bigger than the Black Lives Matter protests. And obviously it didn't prevent the war in Iraq. We have been living through a moment in history from 2006 to 2020 when, there were so many more protest movements. It was really the era of protest, so many people out in the streets. But then what did we get out of that? I won't say nothing, right? The Me Too movement really increased awareness around the issue of sexual harassment. Black Lives Matter increased awareness around issues of racism. But in terms of legislative results, well, maybe BLM is a particularly good example of that. The results have been pretty depressing. We had the worst slogan ever with defund the police, which is utterly unpopular. Also, and maybe particularly so among communities of color who, deal much more with the effects of crime. Obviously, what we needed was better policing, smarter policing, community policing. In the US, you have police officers who have maybe a couple of weeks of training, and then we give them a gun, which is utter insanity, obviously. But, yeah, that is, I think, really sad. And there's a real lesson to be learned there, that there was so much energy, so much political energy as well. But what happened with it, right? What did we achieve with it?